that. And it was 2 people, but I just adjusted it with the local receipts. It was for 2 of them were together only like 3,000.
How many hours do you have to work to be full-time?
19?
30.
You're fired.
Oh.
Full-time.
Yeah.
30.
Oh.
30 and you're available for benefits.
Jason is on.
Call the meeting to order. And first order of business is approve the minutes of the last meeting. Do I hear a motion?
They include the changes? Okay.
I make a motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
There are no opposed. We'll go ahead, and now the minutes would be the town warrant, right? That's the next one?
Yep, so I handed out a new warrant, because after I sent these out to you last week, at the Tuesday selecting meeting, they amended Article 14 and added a line in there, so it changed before it got posted on Thursday. I believe it said, where they've changed it is the very last 2 lines. It'll say the Human Resource Director shall be a department head and shall report to the town administrator. I think that was there, and I think that then added, issues arising pertaining to the town administrator shall be adjudicated by or taken to the Board of Selectmen. I think that was the line that was
I go from 11
It
to,
added.
wasn't there.
Yeah,
11 to 15.
that was page 4,
Oh,
bottom of page 4.
okay. Yep.
But I believe everything else was the same. So these you'll have the motions hopefully Wednesday next week. And I didn't know if you had if you had a chance to look at the warrant articles and whether you need to have, I know I had the HR director here last week, because that was a big article, but whether you needed anybody from planning to explain any of the zoning, or,
No, because we don't.
you don't really,
No.
We don't make a motion on the
comment,
planning
but-
board. We try to stay financial. I don't know who did Article 19, planning board. An energy storage, gasoline, oil, natural gas, propane. So if they're talking about energy storage, I know they're intending that to be solar. But if they just say energy, that includes everything.
Well, don't they, isn't that the definition right there?
The capture of energy.
so they define what energy storage
They
is.
You're doing
defining it
You're
there.
doing LNG, you're taking natural gas and you're capturing it. Anyway, it's not my problem, it's just, I think they gotta,
I don't think it was in the definition of, they define energy storage. So the capture of energy produced at one time for later use, for use at a later time. A device that stores energy is generally called an accumulator or battery. Energy
Yeah.
comes in multiple forms, including radiation, chemical, gravitational potential, electrical potential, electricity, elevated temperature, latent heat, and kinetic.
yeah,
So
their
they don't
definition
reference.
needs work. And it could be a tank, as well as an accumulator or battery, if you're talking energy, especially if it's chemical. Chemical wouldn't be
Yeah,
a
but they
battery.
didn't list it as in the definition, so they can't. They'd have to amend it and add.
That's what I mean, they really should work on that. But anyway, it's not my
And
problem.
that's why we don't do anything on it.
Yeah.
I'm an energy man, so.
I think Article 12 is the one that's gonna deal with gas. That's liquid, right?
14.
I'll see if everybody's in agreement to combine.
Oh, the, combining the departments?
Oh.
Oh, that's not what I thought it was, okay. What are we calling him today? Superintendent of Highway?
Yes, yeah. I gotta think about that, man. Yeah, highway superintendent, and then he's now
Didn't we just
superintendent.
change him?
He went to Department of Public Works superintendent.
Yeah, okay. So we have to vote on Article 6 at some point.
Yes.
And maybe while we're talking about the articles, Article, I think it's 16, the Public Safety Complex.
Yep.
I need your opinion on how you would want that worded, on whether you wanted the motion to word being contingent upon a debt exclusion, or just leave it and still go for the debt exclusion. And I guess basically what I'm trying to say is, as I understand it, if you make it contingent upon a debt exclusion and it passes at town meeting and fails when you have the election at the ballot question, that would automatically undo the appropriation, the bond authorization. If you don't make it contingent, you can still go for the debt exclusion, but if it fails, the bond authorization still stands, and you can have another debt exclusion question in the fall. But in order to get rid of the bond authorization, you'd have to go back to town meeting and rescind the bond authorization. Now, there would be reasons why you would do it either way. If you think that there may be other revenue sources that you could apply in the future, and you could do it within the levy limit, then you could still do the project because you've already got your bond authorization from town meeting, because they're two different things. So I needed to know how to word the motion.
Does a bond authorization set a dollar value?
Yes.
It does. It has whatever the committee says, hey, it's for.
And it doesn't mean that even if you started to do a project, you could, 5 years from now, say you want to exclude the debt that you hadn't excluded, had been successful, you could do the remaining debt for the remaining years. So that's why they're kind of two different animals. The town meeting is what does the appropriation and gives the authorization for the bond. And the ballot question purely says, I want it inside or outside the levy limit.
Okay.
But you can link them with that contingent. You've probably seen that as well, where they make it
Yeah.
contingent. And so it automatically reverses out.
So if we don't make it contingent, we wouldn't have to redo the bond authorization.
Correct.
If you make it contingent, at some point you would have to redo.
Is there a cost to getting a bond authorization for you to go out and?
No, it just sits there until whoever makes the decision to actually go forward, and part of that would be you guys to know whether you could fund it within the levy limit, or that you at some point have a debt exclusion, or you have other revenues that have come in that you can work at both, a little bit of both, or it's just what you want to do with that.
I think it'd work out better if we didn't have a limit, didn't have a restriction at this point, give us more flexibility later to see what we need to do. We don't even have any real numbers yet, so, I'm pretty sure we're close, but.
So what the bond authorization says, that you can't go any higher than whatever the number you put there for a bond authorization to borrow.
Do we have any?
Doesn't mean you have to go
Also-
up to that amount.
So that's what
Up to.
sets a dollar value.
Town meeting sets the dollar value of what you can go to, so in this case, we were talking like 28.5 being
Yeah.
the top end, but if the project came in at 26 million, you can't borrow for the 28.5, you can
Right,
only
you can
borrow
only
for
borrow
what your
26,
actual
right, yeah.
expense was.
Yeah.
If we didn't have that exclusion in there, and it came in at 30, even though we all in our minds at that point thought it was gonna be 28.
You'd have to go back to town meeting and get the differential. Or you'd have to be able to fund that,
Yeah.
but
Some
you'd
other
have
way,
to
yeah.
appropriate it from somewhere,
No, but what I'm saying on is if this passed the way it's written, no exclusion, no contingency on
on a debt
on the debt
exclusion.
exclusion.
Yep,
And it comes in at a higher number, right? There's no needing to go back to the town to go to a, I'm trying to understand.
no, because
there's
your
a number
town
on
meeting
here.
has authorized X amount of dollars, so in this case, we're looking at 28.5, we may end up a little less than that, but
Yeah,
if you say 28.5 at the Maytown meeting.
yeah,
For a bond authorization, you cannot go over that.
right,
Yeah,
You can go under that, you can't go over
right,
to go over, we'd have to have another vote.
right.
for the additional.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this will have a number on it at town meeting.
Yes, yes.
Oh, it will.
This has
all
a
right.
number at town meeting.
Oh, this will have all right, that's the part, I thought we were
The
looking
the
at
ballot,
as written.
yeah, the ballot question doesn't appropriate funds and doesn't
Right,
authorize
right,
debt, it just
right, in or out,
authorizes in
right.
or out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is still going to change one more time, and the number's gonna be.
When we give you the motions, it'll be in the motions what they're gonna do.
Okay. That's the part I
Yeah.
was missing, I guess.
Yeah, I think.
I just didn't wanna see us, you know, have an open-ended number or an open-ended
Yeah.
question that says, hey, you wanna add a second training room or a day spa or whatever. That's
Swimming pool.
swimming, right, exactly. Okay, as long as it's not open-ended at
It's
any
not,
point.
no, it's not.
Okay.
No, at the meetings, it seemed like 28 million is within the ballpark they're talking, but Monday, they're gonna come up with a real number. I think probably that's what you're waiting for.
Yeah, that and if I'm applying anything else from like the settlement money over, I have a email out to Robin to ask her how she wants that. Cause I have the wording as if it was a straight, from bond council, I have the wording if it's just a straight bond authorization, how it needs to be worded, but now if we throw anything else in, I've gotta get that worded that bond council will approve. But I did do, while we're on the subject, just so you can have, I did do I think Joe had asked me for how much it was gonna cost on the
What was
tax
gonna
rate,
cost?
the public safety building.
Oh,
So I did 28.5, because the cost of borrowing was also have to be contained in that authorization, but I did it for 30 years and I did 2 scenarios. Now, understand these are estimates, because when you actually go to borrow, it might be like 2 years from now. So one has a declining balance, which usually is a better interest rate, and one is the same amount every year, which is a little bit higher interest rate. And then at the very bottom of each column, I did a average home value in Charlton's 281,800. So I did whatever the annual amount would cost that person, and I also did how much per 100,000, so people could kind of multiply it out depending on what their value was. And then the second sheet's just a little calculator that I used, if you guys wanted to put your own in. And
Thank
then
you.
the third is a list of the debt that's coming off, and some explanation of things that could change this if you had different revenue sources. I thought that you guys might want this information. So this to me is like worst case scenario, because this is the 28.5.
you can read that, huh?
I like my small print. And if you apply some of the Exxon funds, then the 28.5 would lower, and I'll recalculate. It's easier to explain to taxpayers when you say a even dollar amount every year. That's the easiest way to explain it. But it's cheaper for them in the long run. They save quite a bit of money in interest if you do the declining balance.
Yeah, saving about 3 million.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I do. We'll see what the town does.
And in 2 years from now, when you're probably doing this, I put in when I thought your first payment would be, and then you've got a couple that are coming off that are debt exclusions. So right away, 2020 and 2021 would definitely be off. That's like 21 cents off the tax rate before you would even borrow for this, because it's gonna take, at the earliest, if this all passed now, it would take till probably next March before you could even start, maybe even April. And then probably another 12 to 14 months of construction before you'd go out and do a full borrowing.
Do we know what our total debt is? I know it must be somewhere, right? It must be in the,
In your budget book, I have at least the debt payments and
Oh.
what years they're coming off.
okay. Joanne probably has that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the very last page, what's ending.
No, I just wanted to know
Yeah, the
what.
total.
And the statement of indebtedness, I could get you a copy of too, that would have,
Yeah. Actually, I could look that up.
yeah, you'd have the balances on
Yeah.
that. And then I kind of moved the ones that were betterment, paid by betterments, I moved those into a separate section, because those really won't impact
Mhm.
taxation, what you're talking about.
Is non-excluded the same as non-excluded?
Non-excluded debt,
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It's just a typo.
Spelling.
yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Always the details, always somebody.
And I didn't really factor those into the conversation, because I still think that you're going to have things over the years, ambulance, fire trucks,
Yeah.
things that you're gonna have to do, that you're gonna need that levy capacity to pay debt within the levy limit, smaller projects.
You can almost look at the capital plan for that. You know we got things coming up.
So I was just kind of comparing the exclusions, because those will be done, and they do feel that is an impact for the taxpayer the opposite way, so.
Yeah.
So that I get this chart right, so the fire truck comes, this year's the last payment of the fire truck. The last $90,000 of principal we pay for the fire truck.
FY '20, the
20.
budget, the
Which
budget year,
means that
yep.
then 6 cents of the taxes is now free and clear of any other.
Comes off the tax rate, because you don't have any authorization to have it there except to pay the debt, and once the
Right.
debt goes, it goes.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. So when the school, you said the school department didn't need that 415 because last 2019 fiscal,
Right, that was the last middle school payment,
right?
yeah,
So that comes back.
yes.
Free and
Well, it's, whether it comes back, it goes away and it goes back to the taxpayer.
Right.
It's not going back into the budget, because it was there for only that purpose.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly, okay. So that's why that's not really available for anything, operating expenses or capital or whatever. because
Correct, it's gone.
It's gone,
yeah, both sides went.
Yep.
Revenue and the expense
Yep.
went.
okay.
And I guess I could have listed that as well on here, they'll feel that in FY '20, because the FY '19 was the last payment.
Mm-hmm,
But since we don't pay it directly, I didn't show it. It's,
okay.
Billy Chow pays it.
All right, but that was one point I had not quite gotten, that when you finally pay off, you actually reduce the tax rate by that. I always thought
Yeah.
that stayed.
No,
Kinda like a
only
2.5
would stay as an override.
Right, kind of like
Yeah.
an override. It's not.
If it's an exclusion, it doesn't.
Yeah. All right, so I did learn something tonight.
And you can have capital exclusions, which I don't think Charlton's done, but that's just one year outside the levy limit for that capital item. So if it's not something big enough that you would borrow for, say it was 500,000, you could do it one time outside the levy limit. You'd have to go through the same process with a ballot question,
Yeah.
but it's called a capital exclusion.
Yep. I was also reading, you can have a capital stabilization fund in addition to an,
You can have a stabilization fund now pretty much for anything. Town meeting has to create it, but you can, you just have to say what you're going to use it
and you
for.
give it a definition, and say, this
Yep.
is for buying a fire, vehicles, or this
Right.
is for buying buildings. or-
Yep,
And then it can only come out of that stabilization for that purpose.
Correct.
That's how you set it up.
unless town meeting dissolves the original article that created it,
Yeah,
then
Okay.
they can do that as well.
all right. So it's just another way to put a different bucket out there for a long-range plan.
I did that actually in Oxford. When Oxford built their high school, they did it within the levy limit. And they took the money that was in stabilization that they had saved up to pay the debt for, we did it over 10 years. We put that into a stabilization reserve to pay the high school debt.
So that it couldn't be voted out for any other.
For anything else, it was just used to pay the debt, and so it didn't have to be a debt exclusion, and we paid it off in 10 years. But we had put all the money aside.
Yep,
Um, And so that was another avenue. We knew that it was coming up and we just kept putting money into it.
Yeah.
Kind of like you would do at home. You'd save for a
Yeah.
particular item and then you borrow it and you're gonna pay from that savings account, just for that.
Right,
It's a good idea.
yeah.
It saves you having to get a debt exclusion.
Yeah.
It sounds like a great idea if you know what is coming up over the next 10-year timeframe.
Yep.
A fire
Yeah.
truck or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then everybody knows, no matter what you do, you can't touch that. That's
Yep.
for this. I like that idea.
Yeah.
You just did, last fall, water stabilization, water enterprise stabilization, and a
Mhm.
sewer enterprise stabilization. So those are used just for that
Mhm.
as well, so.
Yeah.
I'm looking at another one on the natural gas. And the way they've got it written up, let's see, natural gas distribution stations, substations, piping, provided any portion of substructure and so forth, including not including the dwelling service pipe, shall not be less than 300 feet from the road or 300 feet from any structure, except the main pipe in the street, and the house is only 50 feet from the street. How do you get 300 feet?
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair? Why are we talking about this?
I'm just looking at
I
it,
mean,
never mind.
we
I'm
got a lot
sorry.
of stuff to cover, and we keep going back to,
Yeah, go ahead.
planning board stuff that doesn't help us. Sorry, but
Go ahead.
Donna, I have a budget question.
Okay.
Have we totaled up the amount of increase in salaries?
I have not totaled them. Would you want it including the 2.5% increases and people who have been reclassified changes?
Well,
It's hard to break out for me, because I have to probably give you the total of
So,
it.
so here's my question. I'm looking at 4 positions right now that are all greater than, well, I'll read the percentages, 13.4, 14, 15, and 17% increases.
I'd have to know which ones, but some of the budgets last year, because there were contracts not settled, so if they're contract ones, it may have been 2 years worth of settlements.
These are all leadership positions.
Okay, so some of those were, I know a couple of them were reclassifications. Some were voted at town meeting as reclassification. Others, I believe the HR director and the town administrator went through to do there was a law passed on July 1st about pay equity and making sure that females who are on the same level as a male counterpart, may not be the same job at the same level, need to be paid equivalent. So there was some equities there that they did. There was a contract settlement with the town administrator back in July, that wouldn't have been in this budget that we're in, so then that compounds for next year.
But along that same lines, okay, Donna, what puzzled me was I'm gonna call it the March 7th draft of what the town administrator recommended, okay, would have been, say, less than what the department requested. That was the first draft of a budget that we got.
Right.
Okay? Then we get a revised one that increased it by, I'll pick one, by $2,800, going back to what the town department asked for.
Because they didn't know at the time. One of the things I try not to do is make it look like the town department didn't ask for it. If they're in a negotiation of what the rate's going to be, and then they determine that this is what they're going to do. Because my cutoff is December 31st from the department head to me, I adjust it to be the same, so it doesn't look like they were asking for less. It's just at that time, they didn't know what it was gonna end up at. I have quite a few. The 2 that I knew about that happened this year was building commissioner and assessor, which was voted last fall, but I didn't get the numbers to know. I had the number in, but I didn't know they were also getting the 2.5 on July 1st. So that was this change that I just gave you. Prior to that, there was a whole list of ones that I got from HR that were going to change on July 1st, that was going to be the new rate of pay as they went through to align the rates.
Okay.
Another
trying to
one,
follow what you're saying, okay,
Highway
but-
highway went to, superintendent of public works and was added like an additional 10,000. So when you do those percentages, they're gonna be high. They did move people.
Right, but to go from $39,000 a year to $43,000 a year, 41%, $4,100 raise.
Yeah. And it
Would that
depends on
number
whether
have come
hours
from all
were,
of these reclassifications, or?
some hours that were increased. So the ones that I know, my assistant, we had the hours increased to full-time. I think HR had an increase from 22 to 30 or something. Assessors had a clerical person's hours increase, so some were hours that were increased, but there was, of administrators, there were several that I got notified from HR that they were changing on July 1st as part of the equity, bringing everything into alignment.
Yeah, I read that in the assumptions part, the Board of Selectmen's priority to address pay equities. And I was just wondering, who determined what the inequities were? Is that the personnel boards?
I think the HR and Personnel Board had worked on it.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
It's just, it was quite a jump to go from what was recommended on the March 7th draft
Right.
to the revised April 24th draft,
Yeah.
you know?
And I do believe there's still individuals that they have not addressed yet, that are not covered by a union, that they were waiting for the contracts to be settled before they address some of the non-union people.
Can't they address these issues, and then when they're settled, it's retroactive or something? At least we know what numbers we're looking at or potentially looking at?
That would be HR and the town administrator. I mean, they put these in for July 1st, because as you know, when you don't have it in and you do it next year, it looks even worse.
Yeah,
And I had that situation with, I think it was police union wasn't in, and
Yeah.
not sure even fire wasn't in last year. My preference would be like to have everything the way it's gonna be. and
Yeah.
Not make changes in retros, because it clouds everything.
yeah.
Yeah, it just got very hard to follow.
Yeah.
From one budget to the next budget to the next budget,
Yep.
what somebody's thought process was. I was like Joe, I was a little befuddled at 12, 14% pay increases, saying,
Yeah.
something's different here. These are not the numbers that when that group appeared before us, they said, here's what we're looking for.
Right, because they were not in the review of it. It was HR and Personnel Board going through, trying to make sure that they weren't in any violations. Even their, they have the range, I think that came up as a discussion, if I'm not mistaken, last May, that there were ranges, and nobody had taken the ranges and increased them by the 2.5% every year that was being voted. And then you had the issue with the planning board thinking that they weren't even in the range, when they actually were in the range if they had increased it by 2.5%.
Yeah.
But many of, almost all of the other employees were on the outside of the bottom end of the range. They weren't even in the range.
Okay.
So they upped it, and new people coming in got put into the ranges, because that's what the market demands, but the people who had been working here for the most part were the ones being left
Oh.
behind. Which I think tends to happen, but.
It just seems like it's a very hard process we use here to, 2 weeks before we're ready to pass this thing, and we're still getting another number, right?
Well, I've kind of just tried to put my foot down last week and said, no more changes. We're done. That didn't work out too well for me.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, my concern is if, when this gets to the town floor, there's gonna be a lot of people asking questions about why we're giving out 14, 15, 17% raises.
Yeah.
And without a solid explanation, and Donna, I'm not saying you're not explaining why, but for each position, I can't support the budget right now. I can't support, I can't stand it, I can't look people, the taxpayers in the eye and say, oh yeah, well, the town hall budget's going up by this massive amount, as I see it, because of these various reasons, but I don't have an explanation as to why. So I would make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we ask the HR director to come back with information for each of these line items on reclass, who's been reclassified, what position, and what percentage was reclassification versus what was, you know, an average raise for the year. Because again, you know, I'll pick on somebody, not to pick on them, but they happen to have the highest increase.
Town clerk? The town clerk?
No, it was the Council on Aging Director,
Oh,
17%. Like, wow.
We're gonna have a meeting
And I
next,
know that she was one of the ones that when you compared the people who were graded on that level of male counterparts, she was extremely below, and that's against the law. And that law passed July 1st, so everybody is addressing these issues. That's the fair wage law.
Yeah, and that's, again,
Yeah.
that's fine, it's just that helps to explain
Yeah,
this particular increase, so people who may look at the details and question it.
next week.
Okay.
Do I hear I heard the second, do I hear all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So I'll have the HR director, next week.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
And we'll put her on first so she can explain it before we get to the budget.
That's fine.
Yeah, would be helpful. So on your assumptions.
are you speaking, those that are, and you may not know that looking at it, those are non-contractual, the non-union?
You know, the union would be all contracted, right?
Right, I didn't see any union, so, quite honestly, the union, most of the union folks are not called out in a line item, right? They're in a bigger lump if it's,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just under labor.
if it's
Good
you know,
departments.
the police
Some
department.
of them are, but,
Joe, isn't the one that is outlined best for us is the one that was marked the 424 group, okay?
Yeah.
And you would even put in, okay, you would
Yeah.
orange highlighted. Those are the ones I think that stuck right out, maybe because you
So-
orange highlighted.
well, some of those ones in the orange highlights are the collective bargaining agreement. They rearranged job positions. They recategorized to, I believe, only 4 positions. So you're now either a department assistant, assistant department head, administrative assistant. I think there's 4 of them.
But
So
those
you-
are all contracted.
That's from the collective bargaining, so a lot of those were collective bargaining that I did make changes on.
I think you're looking for most of the department heads and some of these others.
Right.
I can give you the list of the collective bargaining ones, because I had the list from HR for those. But those did change more, they were out without a contract this year. So you'll have the increase for this year added on, you'll have the increase projected for next year, and they were reclassified as to what they were. They now did 4 job codes, and they had to fit into one of the 4. Some went up more than others on that.
Yeah, so part of the explanation next week when she comes is, how does this work? How do the classifications work? Okay, and against what standard are you holding us to? Okay, I don't know if it's a state standard or a fed standard, but.
So everyone is a little different, so the collective bargaining unit, they just, with the clerical, will be based on what the clerical contract was agreed to and signed to. And that will put people into what slot they were put into and what the increase for next year will be. Because knowing that this year's was not factored in there, because they were without a contract till 2 weeks ago. Personnel board ones, which is more your administrators, that's covered by more your personnel board. But then you have police union, fire union, highway union, and the clerical,
Yeah.
professional union.
No, anything union I got no problem with, because that's
It's contracted.
negotiated.
Yeah,
Right,
it's a contract.
Right, that I get.
Okay.
But as the rest of us, you know, saying 8% here, 14% there, that's the part we just don't get. And that's,
I
I
mean,
think, where,
I'd like to see a table of, these were equity adjustments in all the positions, but then also include the ones they're still looking at, so we can see what the potential, if there's 6 more,
Yeah,
whatever.
there's probably
Yeah. And then kind of,
half
and
dozen
then
to a dozen, maybe.
why those were excluded. in this-
Well, I can tell you why they're excluded right now. The ones that they excluded were people who are somewhat equivalent to some people who are in the clerical contract. So they did not want to upset the apple cart. They wanted the contract settled first. So what I mean by that is you have several either administrative assistants or part-time that do the same jobs as people that are in the union, but because they're not in the union, because of the job that they do, whether it's confidential or they're part-time and they're not allowed to be in the union, but the work is similar, they let the contract be settled first. But they haven't gone back now and looked at those people who are either part-time or administrative assistants who are not in the union, because it would be disadvantage for them to be in the union. Like Mary or Kara or your police administrative assistant, your fire administrative assistant, those have not been looked at. And that was the reason why those were held out. There was a couple of, I have one that, I have a part-time circulation clerk position, but it's the same job as the circulation clerk that's in the union. It's just they're not allowed to be in the union because the change went to 20 at one point, and those that were working less than that, that were grandfathered in, are actually working the same hours, but they're only in because they got grandfathered. So now you have 2 side-by-side people, but the one person's not in, technically in the union. So it would be unfair to pay them at a different rate than the person in the union. But they didn't want to change that because then that drives the union contract. So they waited for the union contract to be settled.
a lot of moving pieces.
So those ones that were held back for that reason, that I'm aware of. There's probably between 6 to 12 throughout the town that fall into that little spot.
All right, that's wages, what else? On the revenue side, I appreciated on your assumptions chart where you laid it out, who got increased by what. So our overall expenses increased by $977,000, right? That's a combination of I did some quick numbers on your assumption
Yeah.
sheet. 544 on 2.5, and 360 on new growth.
Yeah.
And then the one I was questioning, the 150 for the snow removal, because we're not putting that into next year's, we're looking to take that out of this year's?
Right, because it's an overdraw of this year. And so when what I had talked to Robin about is if I have to put the contract settlement in for the clerical that just got signed, then I'm gonna have to either cut somewhere else, or I've gotta remove that snow and ice out. And personally, I don't like the snow and ice being off the top of your cherry sheet. That comes off the top of your taxes, because that is very volatile, whether you had a good winter affects your budget for the following year. I'd rather say, okay, it was a tough winter with snow and ice removal, or more ice than snow, this year. We'll take it from stabilization, because that's not a recurring item, and deal with my recurring items as part of the budget.
Okay.
And I know, there's also why didn't you just let's just increase the snow and ice budget by another 150, because we've had to do this 2 years in a row. Well, whatever you vote has to stay at that threshold going forward. So if you move it up, it stays there permanently, in order for you to be able to spend in deficit. That's a little state thing that goes on. So once you etch it up, you can't bring it back down. So that's why it stays down lower.
Is that pertain only to snow and ice?
Snow and ice. Snow and ice, in order for you to qualify for spending in excess of an appropriation, which you absolutely need to with snow and ice. That's the little rule that they have. You have to at least budget it for what you budgeted in the prior year.
Yeah.
So once you decide to go up, that's fine, but you can't ever come back down, and that's the problem.
So that's
tie
why
up the
we're
money.
budgeting 0 for next year.
No, that's, no,
it's
no,
just
I'm
the-
budgeting 100 and,
You
there's
can't
like
go below last year's.
175,000 in snow and ice.
Oh, okay.
We just maintained that same number, but it was up over 300,000 is what the actual cost was this year. I know, we didn't have a lot of snow, but we did have a lot of ice and a lot of sanding going on.
So basically, in those 3 items, if there's the $1 million, or basically that increased
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
increased the budget.
Now, I did not factor any revenue in from marijuana. I don't think it would pass the muster even with the state at this point, because you have no track record of how much it would be.
Have they even started yet?
I think one might start pulling in revenue come July 1st. But we don't have a track record, and DOR is not gonna let you
No,
estimate.
I don't mean it that way, but are they even in business at this point?
Well, you have the,
You did the one around 20.
the one on
Yeah,
20,
are they-
gold,
But-
Are they open?
gold.
Green
But at
Gold.
Green Gold's getting
the last
close.
selectmen's meeting, they said it was delayed again because of DOT issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
that's
got I talked to him this week.
Okay.
I believe those are now resolved.
Okay.
He estimates by the end of June, he'll be up and running.
No, okay.
But I don't have a number to really compare, and I don't think by the fall would the state say, oh, that's a good record history to estimate revenue on marijuana. They're just not gonna
Yeah.
apply that. Too many towns have been caught that, oh yeah, we got, $1 million coming in, let's put that in the budget, and then,
No, you don't want to do that.
well, no, I think the state did
So-
that, wait a minute.
So probably in July, we'll start getting revenue in. I don't want it in the budget.
Right,
We'll probably start getting revenue in.
right, so the next year's budget,
Yeah, you'll have a record.
2021, you'd have some idea. I'd have about 6 months worth of, by the time December rolls around, I start working on the budget again, I'd have at least 6 months of,
Yeah.
what did you collect?
Okay.
Plus-
What about the increase in those cell phone towers revenue? Is that factored in?
Well, because of, the cell phone towers, we're just doing the appraisals on.
Yep.
So they'll be part of the new growth.
Right.
So the new growth I did up.
You did.
However, we also have the other edge of that with the solar, whether that, we lose that court case.
Okay.
Again, Donna, any idea when that's gonna get?
Nope. And I know even if we lose it, we'll go right into an appeal on it. We're not gonna back off. We have too much to lose to not fight it.
What do we have in the budget for revenue on that?
For solar, what did I say it was? 265,000, I think, is what we stand to
Significant amount,
lose,
right.
something like
Yes.
that.
I have a question on the reassessments. So whether after an appeal or they didn't appeal, let's just pretend, what's the rollout before we actually see that money anyways?
They can, they could retro it back and tell us to pay back, going back in time from
Okay.
whatever they first filed the appeal, whatever the first year was. And I don't know if you guys remember, this happened with, I believe it was Verizon, probably 10, 15 years ago. And the town didn't value Verizon, the state did, and gave you the value. They lost. And every town had to come up with money to pay the abatements on the Verizon. And it was multiple years. And back then, you couldn't put the years together, so each levy year was separate, so if you didn't have the money in one levy year, you had to raise it on your recap. You couldn't just say, oh, in total, I have enough. It went by each levy year. And that's why modernization kind of changed that and let you say, well, if I have enough in total, I'm okay. But I don't know I don't know how badly affected, Charlton, but I was in Oxford when that came through, and I was like, wow. There was like 5 years of abatements and they were older.
I don't remember, was that for the FiOS?
It might be,
Yeah.
it might have been. I was stunned because they were years that I had already closed the levies on.
Okay.
I'm like, I don't have anything left for those. Those are zeroed out. So then those that were zeroed out, you had to raise. Had we been behind our collections and left them open for 6, 7 years, we would have been okay, but.
Is any revenue generated with the marijuana after July 1st basically going to end up as free cash at the end of the 2020 fiscal year?
Depends on what you do in October. It won't be part of this fiscal year, but it could be part of next fiscal year, but, I have to do some discussions with Robin on that, because the host agreements, and there's another, like a development agreement, that kind of say where the money should go, but you can't really earmark the money, so the way you have to do it is the way you are now doing Millennium. So you would do, I'm gonna collect this amount, but I also have to put that as a transfer to stabilization, or transfer whatever the purpose was that's in that impact. You're gonna have to do that in October. If we have those host agreements, gonna collect money, and
Right, so if a host agreement says, we're gonna contribute $10,000 to your public safety building, that will be segregated, right? And I'm
well,
also
you'll
gonna-
have to vote it at town, you need to have it at a town meeting, so that you're gonna show, like, you have Millennium coming in for whatever, 700,000, you'll show money coming in from, Fourscore or whatever for, say, 10,000, and you'll have the expense going to, it's being transferred to a public safety,
Whatever's in the agreement.
Right. whatever's in the agreement.
Yeah.
But you need to get it so it's on, so that's in the tax rate, because they're gonna consider that general fund money like they do Millennium. It's just how it's how it's worded. So there's a little bit more, and it's too hard to get in play for now. For next year, I don't have I'm just getting the host agreements now to kind of work out, but yeah, I have to kind of pre-plan it, because once you set your rate, it's gonna go into free cash. I won't be able to do what it's telling me to do. And that's the hard part.
Okay. But it's not being, I'm sorry, go
Okay.
ahead.
But does that include the 3% sales tax?
So everything is supposed to go in general fund, and if
Right.
there's any things that are identified in that host agreement, you're supposed to put also as an article to appropriate it for that. So, the 3% might not have been earmarked for anything, that might be just general revenues, and that's why I say I didn't put them in, because I didn't have a track record. I don't know how much those revenues are gonna be. I don't know what their sales are.
Right. So it's, it's unallocated, depending on what some agreement says.
Yeah.
right? But it can conceivably, if it's not already earmarked for something, it shows up as free cash at the end of next year.
Yeah,
Okay. Unless at the October meeting you say, hey, we've generated $100,000 in marijuana money, and the town decides, let's buy a new fire truck.
right, and I haven't set the tax rate, so we can do that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Once the tax rate's set, I can't appropriate from that.
Right.
It'll end up going to free cash.
Right.
And then you'll just be able to appropriate the following fall when it becomes certified in free cash, you can get it from there.
Yeah.
It's not like it disappears, it's just a mechanism, how you can get to it and how quickly you can get to it.
Okay. Is your thought, because we've done snow removal, always over budgeted, from this point forward, you'd like to see it taken out of stabilization before the end of the fiscal year?
I do, because I like to see it in balance.
That's
my preference.
That's your preference, okay.
Yeah.
So we can almost anticipate that now until one of us isn't here anymore. Okay.
And the other thing I think it does is it holds a level of accountability, because now you're telling the taxpayers okay, we were short this and we have to transfer this.
Yeah.
So it's right there at a town meeting, that's why I kinda like it.
Mhm.
When it's kind of embedded the way you're doing it, it's there if people understand how to read the revenue budget, but there's not an appropriation there showing you
Yeah.
that you are overdrawn.
Yeah. All right. It's just, you know, my feeling is never take it out of stabilization unless it's 100%
Necessary.
necessary,
Yeah.
okay? And you're setting a precedent here,
Yeah.
well, this is,
Well, because
We're
I'd
gonna
like to
carve
see
this
it as
out
a
a little.
one-time cost, and I'm hoping that you don't have this repetitively.
Mhm.
I did it a little different, it was done a little different in Oxford, and you may be able to get to that point at some point. Oxford has a full-blown DPW, so their budget is very large, so what I would say to them is, bottom dollar, stay in balance, I don't care how bad your winter was.
Yeah.
You'll do less roads, cause I'm not taking it off the top unless I'm taking it out of your budget next year.
gotcha.
And so I really held, there was no blank check, I held the fire right on their
To the
feet.
fire, yeah.
But here it's different, you don't have that, you know, large DPW budget. And you don't really have that much going to roads to begin with.
Mhm.
You can't like manipulate it like that. But the other side said, the way they voted it, because it's bottom dollar, in the years that they had really good winters, they could use that money to do roads. It's not
Yes.
specific, just snow and ice only.
Yeah.
They voted all in one big lump sum, so, it works sometimes for them, and in some years it's bad, but it always makes them accountable when they're doing their budget. They don't like to spend that money if they don't have to, because they know they can do something else
Mhm.
with it.
Mhm. Okay.
Just different thought process.
Also on your chart here, and again, I like the way you laid it out, yep. Education's getting a 1.5% increase in their budget, and then we come down to, you know, public safety at 12%, and cultural recreation at 10%.
Yeah.
My hope is these are this year's anomalies, that we're not gonna be looking at, public safety every year at 12%, when we're only allowed to increase
Human services, 16.
2.5?
2.5%.
So, one of public safety, if not both, didn't have, the contract settled. So, that was not in the 2019 budget, so it's like a 2-year bump that you're getting.
Well, and I understand too,
yeah.
the big thing is keeping on the additional firefighters. I get that. That's
Right.
this year's, bite the bullet,
Right.
put it in the
You,
operating
you
expenses.
can't have that happen every year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I was kinda going with
Yeah.
this, that, you know, these numbers, while you only increased the overall budget by 3%, there's only 2 departments that stayed under
Yeah,
3%.
right.
And at some point, everybody should be under at least.
It would be nice, but I can see some things coming up in the future that are gonna throw us out of kilter a
Okay.
little bit. That stormwater is gonna be a problem,
Mhm.
and that's gonna be a problem statewide.
Okay.
Don, I have a question on technology. When we supported hiring an internal person last year,
Yeah,
we said we'd look at next year's budget, meaning this year's budget
Yeah.
coming up, and reducing consulting spend. Has that been done? I can't find the line item for it.
no, because I don't think they're gonna do it that soon. He actually only started the end of December, and he's just kinda learning. He's only, been learning primarily this building, and now he's been adding on to the police. So there's a lot, to learn from Ken. The hope is that Ken is the outside vendor, that he'll be able to come here less and will bill us less, because we have someone here that can handle it, but there's gonna be some crossover before that happens of training. You're also got this year, the website, is changing. That's gonna be a big burden on a lot of us. I was in all-day training today, and I'm all day tomorrow, on the website. So before this fiscal year ends, we will have converted to the new website, but,
So if I may ask, what line item do we have in here that is for the
It's not by itself, so it would be under technology and computer, computer maintenance. A lot of the licensing you can't change, that's a fee you have to pay every year, that's like your Vadar and stuff. But we did add some into technology that had been in other departments, that was the Vadar, we did that for this fiscal year's budget. And then telecommunications, I think that was added, that was moved in. But I tried to move what was appropriated, so you could, it didn't look off. It just makes more sense for that to be under technology than to be under municipal utilities, municipal offices. And then some of hardware, you could actually see bills to the IT outside person for some of the hardware, because he'll go out and buy it and then bill us for what he bought. So it's hard to distinguish between what is a service and what is a hardware if I run a vendor report. You'll see that he's being paid for something, and it might include some, he might have bought the laptop or, and then he'll bill us. He doesn't, from what I could tell, he's not marking anything up. Whatever he paid is what he charges to the town. And he can usually get good prices.
So just as a reminder to the committee, last year we voted to add 60,000 to the budget, and then we said we would take it down in consulting, and apparently we're not keeping that word. So I again, feel like we should reduce that. I know we're gonna talk about the budget, but I am certainly considering making a motion to reduce that consulting spend.
He's been on the job 5 months now?
No, from end of December he started, yeah, almost 5, yeah,
March, April.
All right,
end of
four-
December.
And so what you're talking about, Joe, is for next year is where we kept the 60 from this budget year.
Well, so the 60 was for a salary, but I remember it vividly because I fully supported it. It's like, okay, let's bring it in-house. We'll have a person here that can help out, can do this, do this, and we will see a reduction in spend.
Yeah.
So we probably, we didn't spend the 60 last year because we didn't hire until December, so we're okay at this point, but at some point, it's like, hey, if you make this commitment, I live in business every day. If I go and make a commitment to management that this is gonna happen and that's gonna happen, and we're gonna hire and then we're gonna cut, I don't see the second come to fruition very often, to say it that way. And again, I'm looking at this budget going, this thing's growing like mad. This is a huge increase this year. It's gonna be awfully hard to talk to people about spending 25 million on a
Public safety.
public safety building and saying, we need to go for override. When you're pumping a few $100,000 into salaries and other places in here, it's tough to sell.
You probably won't get an override. Not a general override.
I'm sorry, an
Being debt
exclusion.
exclusion, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, misspoke. Yeah, I think an override's a sore subject after last year.
Yeah.
And what would be a real number?
For what?
To reduce the consulting spend?
That's the part where we gotta figure out how much longer is our in-house gonna need this guy.
Well, if we think it's 40,000, it's hard to be clear. I think Donna, you said it's in the maintenance budget, so,
Yeah,
what of that 40,000 is spent on consulting?
Versus the hardware that he purchases and puts through that
Yeah,
line.
'cause
That's
if
what
somebody
you're
else
saying is
purchases
the
it,
hard
you're
part.
still spending it.
The hardware you'd need.
Yeah, but
can
at
see your
what
maintenance
point
problem.
can't we buy our own hardware, I guess, too?
Well,
Well,
you still have to pay for it, so.
Right.
yeah, but if you're buying the hardware for a certain department, shouldn't that come out of that department's budget? No?
yeah, it's been coming out of technology.
So all the computers come out of the technology.
Hmm.
Okay, there's one way to do it.
And I can tell you that this year, and I felt bad for Jeff, he was only here probably 2 weeks. We had a major virus hit, and that took us down and took the entire town offices down. And that was hard to recover from. We're still, some of us are still feeling the effects of that. And so now everything's really locked down hard, which makes it hard to do your job. So some of you may see things that get forwarded and there's no attachments. Those of us that may be somewhere and will forward it from our phone through the email, they're locking that out, and we're thinking you're getting the attachments and you're not, because they've locked down everything so hard.
You think if it's 40,000, is there any amount we could reduce that even a little? To see if we're making some, so-called making progress on,
Why don't I, for next meeting, I'll print out what I've paid to date from that account and let you know what it was for.
okay.
And then you guys can kind of determine what you think.
Can you also then segregate that and say this was service, this was hardware?
Yeah, I'll go through the 2 lines here that are in question, the hardware and the maintenance. The one I broke out that's new for expenses was just if he needs like something in the office that's particular to him.
General office expense type
Yeah,
stuff.
and there
That's
wasn't
$1,000.
it wasn't a line item for it, and I said, well, I'm gonna put a line item, because even for you to go to take a training class, I don't want that in with
Yeah,
computer maintenance and computer hardware, because it's new, it's different. It's, you have an employee.
Are because computers improve so quickly that we don't capitalize them, they're an expense? A laptop, a PC, you're not capitalized anymore?
No, they're because they're like having an adding machine for most of us, so they're,
So it's just an expense?
yeah.
They don't last long.
Right,
They
well, that's-
don't,
that's
but
what I was
you
wondering.
know, the hard part is we do have kind of old ones. But the software is, getting that software updated. I know I'm running on software that will not be supported, and that's the fight I'm having. I said, you got me on an operating system that at some point in the next less than a year, it will no longer be supported, and I don't think that's right. So I've been trying to push my,
you're gonna
Can you
hate
get
Windows
me
10 if that's
first?
what they have to put you to.
I don't care, but I want it supported. I'm on a 2007, something, I don't know. It's really old.
I hate Windows 10.
No, it's just I can understand a laptop not being capitalized, but a server, and I guess we're server-based here, right? We're
Yeah.
not cloud-based, and so a server, is a $6,000 piece of equipment. Well,
Yeah.
that, to me, lasts more than 3 years. 5, 6, maybe, okay?
Does
I
it?
can't,
They can last. I don't know that you wanna use them that long.
well, that's, what I don't know, Joe, is
Yeah, me
just
neither.
how much of this, will a firewall, okay, will that last more than 3 years and should, and maybe I'm really splitting hairs here.
It's just really tough because this is IT for the whole town. So you have servers that are running police and fire and the town hall and the fiber, not the fiber, but the stuff that lights the fiber, the units that light the fiber. Those are all included in these costs. And yeah, one going down is really expensive to replace. But without having someone here doing IT, one of the first tasks that he was assigned to do was identify all the old stuff that's not being used, that are stuffed in closets every place in this building, so we can declare it surplus and get it out. Because they can't remember, oh, that printer, oh, maybe we can use that printer up in, and they brought me like a 10-year-old printer. I'm like, I can't use that, I'm printing checks. Pre-numbered checks at that, even harder if I go
Oh,
down.
God, yeah.
Yeah, that's fun, yeah.
I'm like, you can't, and so, but they, oh, well, yeah, I couldn't remember if that was working or not working. I'm like, okay, we need a better system. You need to do an inventory, you need to move the stuff out that's broken or not used. So I know he's been working on that, and that, if this building was bad, every other building was the same way. You have a lot of computers going on with, because it's a necessity now in every office. So, you know, you got library and senior center and police and fire and here, and so you have a lot of equipment.
Well, not to get off computers for a second, but, and I know this is really a stretch for you, okay?
Yeah,
You know how much of this year's current budget we've spent?
I think that we were actually doing okay, because they just came to see me, and, they wanted to do some server replacements and stuff, and so they were trying to figure out how much they could get out of here.
Oh, I
to-
wasn't talking about just that line item.
Oh,
I was
oh.
talking about the town.
It depends on the department, so, you know, that's
No,
hard
no,
to say.
I'm a big number, okay? Has the town, every department together, have we spent 85% of our,
On the,
budget?
yeah, on the average, you're right where you need to be, with the exception of a couple of line items that you're gonna see in the article next week when I do the motion. There's a couple that are blown out of the water.
Mhm.
But snow and ice would be one. The contract obligations are right there. Legal, I'm holding my breath. I wanna bring that up before, I was gonna bring it up before we leave, but I can bring it up now if you want. If I just have my regular legal expenses from now to the end of the year, we'll probably make it. But there's a number of cases, as you're all aware, that are kind of, I'll just say, pending. So if the land court decides that they're gonna hold the hearing, then in June, we'll need representation, and then I'm gonna have a cost at that point, but I don't know what the cost is.
Mhm.
So more like an advisory, you have FinCom reserve, I may have to come to you in June if that happens. I just don't know when the cases are gonna happen. Are they gonna happen in this fiscal year, or are they gonna happen in next fiscal year?
Do you have to encumber any of that? Because it's happened in this?
No, because
No?
if they haven't provided the service and they don't have the hearing in, say, till July, there was no
Okay,
expense,
so you don't have to worry about an estimate.
no.
A question on legal, what line item does that come out of?
Town council, so,
It's 100K.
it's right between the treasure collector and human resources, budget of 100,000.
Do you have a number?
Yeah, first page, line 72.
Thank you.
I have about 14,000 left. I have 2 more months of regular attorney bills. They run about $6,500 a month, so just on regular, I can get through, but I don't know what's lurking at this point and what's.
So other than those few anomalies, you believe we're pretty much on target
Yeah,
for the rest of the year and,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I won't even ask you about free cash, because I know that
Oh, that I
doesn't come
don't
till
know.
October.
But your departments are very good about monitoring their budgets and staying right on it, and, I give them credit for that. That's a really hard thing to do when you have things coming at you that you didn't know about, and, they do a good job. Even snow and ice, not a bad job considering how large you are for road-wise,
Yeah,
and you can't predict
right. Can't predict
ice
the
and
weather.
snow.
Mhm. This- Anything else I had?
Any other questions?
So next week, HR director to explain the wage increases that were on the 4/24. Is that the one you want, 4/24? And, some breakdown of the IT.
So if we're talking about capital plans, one of the things that was on the 5-year capital plan was a replace engine 1 in the 2020 budget. Fire department, fire chief come to us or anybody and say, hey, you know,
Well,
this was on my capital plan.
and 2020, remember, is also fall, so
Yeah, well,
That's
you
when we
usually
normally
address
go.
your capital in the fall when you have your free cash, so,
Yeah,
that may get addressed then.
okay.
That would be the plan.
They bring their wish lists,
Yeah,
remember?
right. No, because I was looking at that, and it's 3.6 million,
Mhm.
okay? It's just,
it's got white walls.
it's got white walls, that's why. No, I didn't mean the fire truck was 3.6 million. I meant
That's not
the
one truck,
bottom
anyway.
line of that column was 3.6 million.
Yeah.
And as good as you say the departments are, they're not gonna have 3.6 million free cash at the end of
No,
fiscal 19.
no, and I think you guys would kill me if we did, so you really.
Because then you over budgeted
Yeah, really.
last year.
Yeah. I do still always expect a fairly healthy budget, but it's not really driven by what they're returning as much as the revenues
Mhm,
coming in.
mhm. And then the only other thing I actually had was, you know, so you had sent us all these funds where all these other dollars are
Yep,
put away. We never actually went through it, or maybe we did for quickly, but some of that is already accounted in your revenue.
yeah, some of it you use in your budget.
Right.
So I think,
Motor vehicle excise tax, that's
yeah,
in,
yep. Everything pretty much in the O-100 is what is your receipts, so
Yeah.
those would be counted for. But there are some, like your ambulance, you apply money in your operating budget when you do the motion, so it's coming from that ambulance account.
Mhm.
So there are some, there's maybe 6 or so that I know is in that, the wording of that.
that are actually
Budget.
earmarked,
Yeah.
where they're going and.
Yep,
Okay. Yeah, 'cause I was trying to correlate that between how that worked, how these funds worked, and I should be able to find on your revenue, on your first page, on your revenue sheet,
yep.
the correlating. Okay.
What, did you guys decide on contingent or not contingent of that?
Debt
I'm wording
exclusion?
that motion.
Yeah,
Well, it sounded like it was,
the way it was written,
the way it was written with, other than
Yeah.
making sure there's a dollar value in there,
Right,
yeah.
was the right way to go.
With it not being contingent,
Right.
okay.
And right now, it's around 28.5 until we see next week, so.
Yeah. And what did you end up with the policies? Were those looked at all, or
Yeah, we passed them all, I
Yep.
believe.
All 5 of them.
in trust fund document?
There were
So-
5 that we passed.
Okay,
What we didn't
There were-
vote on, you had appendices. We didn't
oh
actually
yeah, I
vote
had
on
those,
appendices.
okay.
So you were giving us 5,
There were 5 policies, I thought, 4 appendix and 1 trust fund document.
Mhm.
So did you vote the trust fund document too?
Mhm.
The reason I'm asking is I got an email from Robin today about the trust fund document, and she's asked town council to look it over, questioning whether or not the finance committee can serve as a trustee on it. I didn't have an issue with it, that's the way I did it in Oxford, and Copeland and Page is the town council there, and said that yes, you can't hold another position, but that's a trustee, it's still the eyes and ears of the town for finances. And you're the trustee, you're not the custodian of the funds either, it's the treasurer. And that was the other one is, would that relieve the treasurer, if she's trustee, from any liability if she runs away with money? And I was like, no,
yes.
not as a, yeah, you'd like that, huh?
Why would you say that?
Not as a trustee, but as a custodian, she'd still be held under the rules of being a custodian and a treasurer, so And you're,
Stealing
and you're only
steals,
one
so.
vote of a trustee, that's the thing, you have to have, the five, or was it, yeah, 5 people I put, you have to have the majority. And that's pretty much how we had done it in Oxford, is just to give guidance to the treasurer, to say, we'd have Bartholomew come in, do a presentation of the different types of investments, this is risky, this is moderate risk, this is conservative, what do you feel? And then we'd say, well, we kind of like maybe moderate risk. And we'd instruct the custodian to invest in moderate risk. We weren't in touching any money or doing anything as trustees, but just kind of giving that guidance. So, that may end up come back for a revote if that gets changed at some point. That's the trust document. I think everything else was okay.
Going back to this list of all these other funds, one trust fund that's in there, and you said, I know you said all the 1,000 accounts are revenue.
Yeah,
and that.
yeah.
But I'm looking at one, and it's funny that I just happened to notice it. It is a fire truck stabilization account with about $1,800 in it.
Yep.
Is that a fund like, a stabilization account
So-
like we were just talking about
So,
earlier?
yeah, so, from what I could tell, there was, a fire truck stabilization fund at one point, and there was a residual amount of money that was left in it that's been earning interest. So you could start adding money into that account to set aside money if you know that there's gonna be a
A
fire truck.
$602,000 fire engine.
It's
one.
just that I would like to go back and find the town meeting that actually established it. As you're probably aware, I said some funds I find really, where's the statutory authority for them?
Yeah.
I haven't had time to go back to those and find them all, but, that is on the books, it's a small amount.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Wouldn't
So
the clerk have
we've
that?
already done that here. We've already-
she's new too, you know? I have to go through I go through town meeting
That's
reports, the annual reports.
Right.
Yeah.
And start reading through them.
Right.
Does anyone know by any chance the, senior work-off, when about that was that voted at a
Established?
town meeting?
No idea, it was probably before I came to town, so.
The what?
The senior
The
work-off?
senior work-off.
They allow seniors to work for
Seniors
a
come in,
certain tax
and then they
reduction.
reduce their
Yeah.
tax bill.
Your dollar amount is on the, I think is on the low side, and I didn't know if that was established at a town meeting.
What is it?
I think it's 500, and I
Oh,
think
yeah,
it can
that
be
is
more
kinda
than,
low.
it can be more than that, but if you voted that dollar amount at a town meeting, you would have to change it then
Yeah,
at a town meeting, or you could say whatever the limit is of the state, you could word it to comply with it, whatever the state limit is. And that way it would up as taxes go up and the state changes and ups it. There's a couple of ways. I've been trying to find the authority on that to see, did they say only 20 senior write-off, senior work-off people can you have, or was there a dollar amount, or?
yeah.
Because seniors could benefit from
That's a
doing
great
that
program.
program. I like the program.
Yeah.
I seem to remember being set at a high, at an overall dollar amount, and then
Just divide it up by how many people
it
applied.
divided up by whoever, and whatever the max
Yeah.
was, if they even maximized it.
And that's moving target too, because you gotta stay with minimum wage,
Right.
Right.
and that's climbing every January, so they get the same dollar amount, but they're working less hours to get
Mhm.
that dollar
Yeah.
amount, but taxes have gone up.
I know.
And that, I think that threshold's quite a bit higher.
Is it common to have that established at a town meeting? 'Cause
Yeah, I think so, I think it is
Hmm.
typically established at a town meeting. But I don't know if there were dollar amounts, because I think Charlton was one of the early on, one of the first ones. So they may not have done what I've seen more recently, where
I'll
they
have to
put-
look at the town I work for, but we have that policy in both the where and now and where.
Yeah,
And it's a great program. As a matter of fact, one of my assistants was a senior work-off person.
yep,
And then we had a part-time position, and they approached her, and that's how she,
Wow.
yeah, and she's wonderful.
yeah. So I've been trying to go back to find it, so I'm
They're
going
great,
through the
they show
annual
up,
reports,
they
trying to
wanna
see if
do
I
it.
can find when that happened.
You know,
Because I'd like to see it increased.
This group of funds is called special revenue donations.
Yep.
Take it unencumbered. Is that what that means when it says
So,
donations?
so donation typically, how that's supposed to work is whoever's giving you the donation is supposed to specify what it's to be used for. So you do have some more generic ones where people will say, just for the, here's a donation for the ambulance department. And they don't specify that it's gonna be for Jaws of Life or for a particular thing. Others are very specific. Now, I have a little bit in those donations that I don't necessarily think they're donations, I think they're trust funds.
Hmm.
They're trust funds, I'm 100% sure, they're trust funds under the state guidelines.
Mhm.
They're not when you go to do your financial statements.
Okay.
So kind of battling with the
This is-
auditor on that. For example,
The Casella money is in that group.
yes.
Is that really a donation?
Well, that's what I was told, is that it was a donation,
Yeah,
How do you define donation?
yeah.
Wrist lock donation or,
So you have those, you have, there's two in there, law enforcement, a state law enforcement trust fund and a federal, law enforcement trust fund. The auditor has those as donations, and I'm like, they're not donations. That's a trust fund. It actually is in the wording as a trust fund.
Yep.
But because they don't have a, in his mind, and I get when you convert to the be GASB compliant, if it doesn't have a non-expendable side, he doesn't feel that it needs to be in a trust fund. But under the state, those are trust funds.
Gotcha.
So we kind of battle a little bit on those. I
do we
haven't-
have the documents, the trust fund,
No, because those are by statutory
Oh.
authority that you can have
and
those.
who are our auditors? Skin?
No, ask me that. Bill,
That's okay, I just,
Bill,
yeah,
Bill and George.
okay. I just kidding.
Incorporated.
So to figure out what that 780,000 minus the 2 highway trucks is supposed to be sent for, they're spent on, there's some document somewhere, or when it was received, was there a letter that said this is what it's for?
Which one are you talking about? The
Casella one.
stabilization?
Yeah,
Oh, the Casella?
yeah.
They're supposed to give me a letter. I don't have a lot of records, and I've been going back trying to find records and documents on stuff. It wasn't a lot in the accounting stuff, but I did find some documents over in Keith's stuff and the treasurer's stuff, so I've taken those and put them in a file, but yeah, it's hard to find some of the documentation of how these existed.
So hypothetically, if you can't find anything that says this is what it's for, there's a $500,000 sitting there that's basically unencumbered.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And personally, if it wasn't used in a year, I would normally close it out, unless it was one of those ones like ambulance. You get a lot of people that give money when they die to the ambulance, but, you know, make a donation to the ambulance instead of sending flowers. I'd be creating funds all day long, so I just usually keep a generic, like ambulance donation or
Yeah.
a fire donation, because they tend to get them. But
So-
usually it's for a specific purpose.
So if you were to close that $500,000 out, where does that go?
It would go into your free cash. Yeah, you have things like tornado, and I'm like, okay, that was a long time ago. What did we,
That was a few years ago.
I think that was a grant,
Okay, wow,
but it's
From the-
categorized as a donation.
yeah. A grant from who?
I think it's a state,
Okay,
when you had your
Yep.
tornado here.
yeah, a few
I
years
think it was
ago.
to replace trees, but,
running out of trees in Joe?
yeah. No, there was that couple of years ago, the one that went from
Got one if you
Springfield
need
in
it, let me
here.
know.
I
It
think
came
there
through
was
Munson, remember it came through Munson?
Yeah.
Years
Oh, yeah, it was a mess
Sturbridge.
up there.
Yeah, it was really on the, it only kind of grazed,
Just brushed us.
yeah, exactly, on the 169.
So you have a couple of things in there that I think are more likely grants or trust funds in those donations, but
Yeah, you basically get about 150 of these things
yep,
to go through and decide which ones
try to find the documentation on it.
and whether
When
they
did I
should just
first
be
get it?
closed or.
I'd like to see them closed. That's a lot to maintain. I'm reconciling that every month.
Yep.
Whether there's a change or not, I still have to add that number in when I'm reconciling cash.
How much money is in there in total?
There's no total down
Oh,
at the
okay.
bottom, but, you know, I'll bet you, if you looked at it, I'll bet you it's 15 million. Because the sewer and water enterprise alone have almost $3 million in it.
Yeah, well, those are enterprise
And
funds.
those
You
are
can't close-
enterprise funds,
you
but I'm
can't
just
close
saying,
those out.
if you're asking on the sheet, okay?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
you have a lot of non-general fund.
Yeah, I'll
have
bet
a
you it's
lot.
15 million. It could just top that. And it's just something that Donna's gonna deal with on a month-by-month, and I'm just, you know, should we start looking at these one by one and
Yeah.
saying, let's just close it?
Well, that's why I ask every now and then, I try to ask people, do they know what this was?
But,
Not
you know-
everybody can remember some of them.
Right, but even the state goes into banks and shuts down accounts that
Yep,
haven't been
right.
touched in 7
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
We should have some kind of right to be able to.
I'm trying to do the big ones first, so it's not like I'm not, I'm doing the things that are problems. Making sure that tax title is right, sale of real estate is right, abandoned properties, the tailings is right. Then I wanna move into some of that, the highway chapter money, which that I think is actually been spent and is probably owed to the general fund, that they probably spent the bill through a general fund. Cause when I talked to the highway superintendent, I don't have money.
Reimbursement went into this.
Oh,
And not into
And the
his-
expense may come out of the general fund,
Right.
you know. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that's
Hmm.
old that I have to get back to. There's a couple of, looks like loan repayments.
oh,
There's receivables.
Was that community
It
development?
has not, well, that's why I was wondering, they're not called community development, but there's been no activity. Joanne and I have not found any activity in like 2 or 3 years as we go back through them.
Yeah,
Like, what is this? They could be deferred,
yeah,
but just trying to find what is the document that tells me. Now, if they're deferred, they wouldn't be payable until somebody sold their property or
Right.
tried to refinance. But, you know, that's a lot of research, and not a lot of
Yeah, I
material
mean,
to
Mark,
research.
there's $5,700 in here for a library chiller, okay?
what the
Now,
hell is
That's
that?
a- that's
That
an
was
air
the
conditioner.
grant.
Big air conditioner.
It's a big air conditioner,
yeah,
all right?
yeah.
Now, they've either already bought it, we
Correct.
got the grant, and it was never put back into
Yeah, they
the
got-
library's expenses,
Yeah.
because they paid for it out of their operating,
Right.
right?
And
Or-
then-
That
and
must
then-
be
and
the
then it
rest
could've
left, because
Or
that
we got
was
the-
like
That was a-
60, that was a
a
huge
big
amount.
expensive
Right.
item, so it's probably, right.
It could be
Right.
just a remaining
Or
balance.
it could be a remaining balance, right?
But like I said, I think it's sitting in a donation, it might have been a grant, does the money go to us, does the money go
Yeah.
back to a
No,
state?
this
Does it-
one is in other grants, you've got
Yeah.
it classified as another grant. So, I
Another
mean, this
grant, so it was probably a
$5,700.
state grant,
Yeah.
but in that case, it may be due and payable back to the state, so that's why I said I have to get the
Yeah.
grant document to try to find out
Right.
how long ago did this happen?
Oh, God.
And as you can tell, there's a lot of them,
Yeah, yeah, there's 4.5 pages
yeah,
of this stuff.
yeah.
Wow.
I was just working on, you had an auction before I came.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the money and put it all in sale of real estate and didn't reduce the receivable. So as Joanna and I are going back and forth and we see, we see people that are in foreclosure and a new owner getting a tax bill, and I'm like, how did that happen?
Oh, no.
So I'm looking at it, it's like, what's wrong with this picture? And she's like, oh no, the town auctioned that. Well, didn't they put the money in the general fund and reduce the receivable? And so, going back like 3 years, oh Lord, to the auditor. Do you wanna know this? They put all the money in sale of real estate. He's like, you gotta make the adjustment this year. I said, yeah, I know. I said, but I gotta tell you that I'm doing it, 'cause
Yeah,
it's gonna look odd, it should slap you in the face that you're gonna see me making this transfer, but this is the amount that should have been reduced out of receivables. And so that's the kind of stuff, checks, outstanding checks, the tailings, trying to get that ironed out, that's years of stuff out there,
how many years?
a lot.
So they never put them,
never cleared them up. They just sat out there, never made any attempt to try to track people down or,
There's uncashed checks.
Yeah, but if they're already labeled tailings, then they must have gone through some process.
well, yeah, whatever the minor process is.
Yeah.
But, you know, some of these were good size that you
Yeah,
could have,
Because then it could have been transferred.
make a
back.
little effort and Google them.
Yeah. You're supposed to post it. You're supposed to legally have those
Yeah,
posted.
they probably posted. If they put in tailings, I would think they had posted it.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, I didn't go back that far to see
Yeah.
if they posted it, but some of them are obvious, they're in town, but as we're going through them and can vet who they are,
Are they vendors or is
Both.
payroll, both?
both.
The payroll should be easy,
Yeah,
but
the payroll's easy, obviously
Yeah.
easier,
Yeah.
but,
Oh, that's bad.
yeah, we were working on that.
Joanne must be working.
Yeah, she was, she's over there, she's cleaning it all up.
We'll attack it all one by one.
Any other questions for Donna? Hearing none, do we hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're out of here.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Donna.
Don't you have to wait until 31st?